Welcome back, Legends. You're at Cross Harry. Another incredible story awaits. What if Ghost Rider bonded with Harry at age 12, and the spirit of vengeance made Dumbledore kneel? Subscribe and hit the bell. Let's dive right in. Chapter 1. Brimstone at number 4. The cupboard measured 6 feet by 3 feet by 4 feet at its tallest point, which was directly above the water heater. Harry had measured it at age 8 using a length of string and a ruler he'd borrowed from Dudley's desk while Dudley was at football practice. He'd measured it because he needed to know the thing precisely. He needed to know the exact dimensions of the place that was his, the only place that was his, so that when he closed his eyes in it, he could map the exact boundary between what belonged to him and what did not. 6 feet by 3 feet by 4 feet. He had that. It was his. He was 12 now and he fit in it differently. His knees pressed against the water heater when he drew them up, his back pressed against the opposite wall. He could not lie fully extended anymore, could put his legs out straight, but then his feet found the door and his shoulders found the shelf above his head, and the space became a problem of geometry. He slept diagonally. He had learned to 6 days. The marks on the doorframe said 6 days. He made them every morning when he woke, using his thumbnail on the soft wood inside the door hinge, where they would not be visible to anyone who opened the cupboard, but would be visible to him in the strip of hall light that came through when he pressed his eye to the crack. The Dursleys had stopped sliding food under the door on day 4, not as punishment specifically. There had been no specific infraction, no calculated cruelty at the origin of it. Vernon had locked him in after a neighbor had mentioned seeing Harry talking to Mrs. Fig's cat in the garden, which was not a problem in itself except that Vernon had decided, as Vernon decided things, with the total conviction of a man who converts anxiety into policy, that Harry should not be visible to the neighbors at all this summer, should not be a subject of neighborly conversation, should not exist in any way that required anyone on Privet Drive to account for him. So the cupboard. And then on day 4, nothing under the door, probably forgot. Harry had considered both explanations with the same flatness he applied to most things about the Dursleys. The explanations had approximately equal probability and approximately equal outcome, so the distinction between them was academic. He was not hungry in any way that alarmed him. He had been this hungry before. The July heat was the worst problem. The cupboard's ventilation was a half-inch gap at the bottom of the door, and whatever the water heater did to the air, which was not ventilated. By midday, the temperature inside was something his body registered as a kind of soft, pervasive emergency, a low-grade insistence that conditions were not sustainable. He pressed his face to the door crack and breathed through it in the afternoons, slow and even, making himself slow down, making his body understand it was being managed and not simply suffering. He'd been managing it for 6 days, and he could manage it for however many more were coming. Hedwig had been sent away 4 days ago with a letter he'd written to Ron, which meant writing something that wouldn't alarm the Dursleys if intercepted, and something that didn't make Ron worry, which meant writing a letter that said approximately nothing. He was fine, hope you're well. Say hello to your mum. Hedwig had gone out the small attic window he'd left unlatched and had not come back yet, which meant she was staying at the Weasleys rather than return to a house that smelled like confinement, which was the sensible choice, and he was glad she'd made it. He sat in the dark. His scar had been hurting since yesterday evening. Not the sudden, sharp hurt it had done at school last year, the white-hot strike of it when Quirrell had touched him, the concussive wrongness of contact between the thing in his scar and the thing wearing Quirrell's body. That hurt had been total and brief. This was different. This was internal and persistent and mobile, the way a bruise is mobile when you press it and the pain travels. It started behind his scar and moved backward through his skull and then came forward again, as if something inside was pacing, testing. Looking for something it had not yet located, he pressed his palm flat against his forehead. The heel of his hand against the lightning bolt. The pain did not stop and did not respond to pressure and did not explain itself. Something was awake in there, something that was not his thoughts. He'd known, in a vague and untested way that had never been confirmed by anyone who would know, that his scar was not merely a scar. It hurt when Voldemort was near. It had hurt all year with Quirrell in the building. Whatever lived in it, whatever residue of that night in Godric's Hollow, had embedded itself in the only wound a killing curse had ever left on a living person. It was sensitive to something. It had preferences. It responded to stimuli. It had never paced before. He sat in the dark with his palm on his forehead and breathed through the door crack. The heat of the day went amber and then gray and then black. He fell asleep at some point. His head tipped sideways and found the water heater, and the water heater was hot, and he moved away from it without waking and found the shelf edge and stopped there, his body negotiating the space on autopilot, long practiced. He woke up to the sound of something dragging across concrete, not in the hall. The hall was carpeted, Petunia maintained the carpet with devotion, and the sound was not carpet. Not the shuffle of Dudley's trainers or Vernon's slippered feet or even Petunia's precise step, iron on stone. That was the sound, slow, each drag separated from the next by exactly the time it took to lift something very heavy and set it down again. Iron on stone in a space that had no stone. Harry went still. He'd learned stillness early and learned it thoroughly, the complete animal stillness that is not rigidity but the opposite, a total present-tense attention that makes the body quiet so the information can come in. He held it. He catalogued the sound. He pressed his ear to the door crack. The sound was inside the cupboard. He turned his head. The temperature had dropped. He registered this as information first before sensation. The heat of 6 days of baking summer had gone, not gradually, but in the space of the 3 seconds since he'd woken, gone from the thick, suffocating warmth that he'd been managing to something that cooled the sweat on his neck and raised the hair on his forearms. His exhale clouded, in July. In the cupboard of a house on Privet Drive, his breath clouded in front of his face. The sound continued, one drag, a pause, another drag. The chain, he understood now that it was a chain, specifically a chain, heavy-linked iron with the acoustic signature of something that has been used and has weight and history, and does not drag itself, was not on the floor. He could not locate the floor as its origin. It was in the walls, in the structure of the small, dark space. In the air around him, his scar split open. That was the only word for it. Not pain, though there was pain. Split. The sensation of a seam failing under pressure, of something that had been sutured inside him turning against the suture. The thing in his scar, which had been pacing since yesterday, went abruptly rigid and then it screamed, not in sound, in his skull. Every tooth in his head resonated with it, every bone in his face, the back of his eye sockets. The thing that lived in his scar was capable of screaming, and it screamed now with the total conviction of something encountering a predator larger than itself. It screamed. And the cold thing in the cupboard heard it. The chain stopped. Silence. 1 second. He could feel it, the cold, the presence in the cold, the total attention of something ancient enough to have patience for geological timeframes turning, locating. The screaming in his skull was a signal, and the signal had been received, and what moved in the darkness of the cupboard moved toward the signal. Buser the Cold said it did not use his ears, it did not use air, unrepentant, known. The thing in his scar screamed louder, and then the cold closed over it and the screaming stopped. 40 seconds. He would calculate this later. He had the before, cold, the chain, the pressure in his skull. He had the after. The after was the front step of number 4, Privet Drive in the early afternoon, and his hands were in his lap, and the garden smelled like burning road tar and something older than road tar, something that belonged to a time before roads, and his hands were shaking in small, involuntary increments, and the scar on his forehead felt like a healed scar. Old, flat, his. He pressed 2 fingers against it, and there was no pain, and there was no presence, and there was nothing pacing, and the interior of his skull was his. The specific, ordinary, untenanted space of his own thoughts, his own body, his own silence. He had never known it was not his until it was. He sat with this for a moment. The cupboard door, he registered this without turning his head, cataloging peripherally, was not open. It was gone. The frame was intact, the hinges were intact, fused to the frame in clean, melted unions of metal and wood, and there was no door. The door frame was a rectangle of empty air leading into a cupboard that contained a water heater, 2 shelves of Dudley's broken toys, and the outline of the door in gray powder on the carpet, clean and precise. Someone had been very careful. The Dursleys were in Mrs. No. 6's garden. He could see them through the fence slats, Vernon with his hand on Petunia's shoulder, which meant Vernon was more frightened than she was and needed the contact more than he was providing it. Dudley on the grass with his arms around his knees, which was not how Dudley sat when he was performing distress. That was how Dudley sat when he actually felt something. Harry looked at them for the duration of 3 seconds. He went inside and made a sandwich. The kitchen was pristine. The whatever it was had moved through only the cupboard, and only that 40 seconds in the rest of the house was Wednesday afternoon, ordinary and unchanged. He opened the fridge. He took ham, 2 slices, bread from the box. He stood at the counter and ate it and looked at the kitchen and looked at the fluorescent tube light overhead that buzzed on its particular frequency and thought about the thing that was gone from behind his scar. His thoughts moved freely. That was the strangest part. No pressure at the edges. No sense of being observed from a position he couldn't locate. His own thoughts in his own skull, moving at his own pace, turning where he directed them. He ate the second half of the sandwich. He went back to the front step. The scorch marks on his hands were already cooling. They had the quality of scars formed quickly, efficiently, by something that knew what scars were for, not damage, documentation. The pink lines ran across his knuckles, and the heel of his right hand, and the webbing between thumb and forefinger. He looked at them for a while. They did not hurt. Hedwig landed on the fence post. She had a letter in her beak, which meant she had gone to Hogwarts rather than the Weasleys, which meant she had better intelligence about where correspondence originated. He held out his arm and she came to his wrist, and he took the letter without looking at the seal, and he looked at Hedwig instead. She was looking at his hands, at the scorch marks. She made no sound. "I'm all right," he told her. She looked at his face. She appeared to be forming her own conclusions. He looked at the letter. The wax seal was a small P for Potter, which Dumbledore had started doing in first year, the personal touch, the warm detail, the gesture that said, "I think of you specifically." He held it for a moment. He pressed it flat between his palms, and the wax cracked along its center, and the paper softened in his grip. He held it over the garden. The flame came from his thumb. He didn't decide this. It arrived, small and precise, the temperature of a candle, but the color of something else entirely, and the letter caught at one corner and burned cleanly, no smoke, reducing to ash in 4 seconds and drifting across Vernon's lawn in a thin gray dispersal. Hedwig watched the ash settle. Then she moved from his wrist to his shoulder, her talons finding their grip, her warm weight steady against his neck, and she said nothing because she was an owl and did not say things, but her presence had a quality that operated the same way. He watched the evening come in. Arabella Figg arrived at 7:30, moving at a speed her knees objected to visibly. She was in her house dress, the blue one with the small white flowers, and she had come through her own garden gate and along the pavement without stopping to change, which told Harry something about what she'd seen from her window. She came through the Dursleys' gate and stopped when she saw him, Harry, out of breath. Cataloging him with fast, thorough eyes that he now understood had been doing this for years with a purpose he'd not known about. "Are you hurt?" "No." She looked at his hands. She looked at the empty doorframe inside the hall. She looked at the Dursleys through the fence. Her face did several things in quick succession that resolved into nothing visible. "I'm going to call. I need to contact someone," she said. "Will you stay here?" "Yes." She went inside. He heard her at the fireplace, the specific sound of flue powder, the rush of it, the low, urgent voice that carried without the words carrying. He stayed on the step. Hedwig made a circuit of the garden and came back. The full dark came. He was thinking about the thing in his scar, about the fact that Dumbledore had written him a letter. He didn't know what it said. It was ash on Vernon's lawn, but had written it, had known his address, had known for 11 years what his address was. He was thinking about the word protection and what it covered, and what it didn't, and whether the people who used it had ever been required to say precisely what it was protecting against, and precisely what it was not. He was thinking about the cupboard, 6 feet by 3 feet by 4 feet, and the report's misses. Figg had been filing, apparently, for years. He was not angry. He recognized the shape of the thing inside him, and it was not anger. Anger moved. Anger looked for exits. Anger wanted to push against something. What he felt was the opposite of movement, a stillness that had located its own center and was in no hurry. The order came in twos because Dumbledore had decided this required care. Lupin came through the gate first. Harry had been told about Lupin by Hagrid once, briefly, one of his father's friends, one of the ones who had survived. He looked like surviving, not thriving, surviving, the specific worn quality of a person whose energy has been spent on continuing rather than anything beyond it. The patched coat. The gray in his hair that was too early for his age. The face that had learned to carry itself carefully. He stopped 3 feet from Harry, with the automatic consideration of a man who understands the importance of not approaching too fast. Harry, he looked at him the way adults looked at Harry when they were frightened and trying to cover it with warmth. "Are you?" "I'm fine," Harry said. "There's ham in the fridge if you're hungry." Lupin looked at Moody. Moody had come through the gate second and stopped just inside it, his magical eye making its circuit of the house, the garden, the fence, the street, the sky, and then Harry. The circuit took 4 seconds. He did not draw his wand. He assessed the scene with the professional thoroughness of a man who has assessed several thousand scenes and is still alive, which is a data point in itself. "What happened?" Moody said. "Not are you all right, not good God. What happened?" Harry found that he appreciated this. "I don't know what to call it," he said. "Something came into the house. It was in the cupboard." He looked at his hands. "There was something in my scar. There's been something there since I was a baby, I think." Since the night Voldemort, neither man flinched at the name. Another data point, since that night. "The thing that came, it took that. The thing in my scar, it's gone now." "Gone," Moody repeated. "Gone." Moody stood very still. His magical eye had stopped rotating and was aimed at Harry's forehead with the fixed attention of a precision instrument. "That thing in your scar registered on our monitoring systems. Every year, we thought it was a residual curse." Or ambient dark energy from the initial attack? Did Dumbledore know what it was? A pause, not long, but present. He had theories, Moody said. Did he know what it was? Moody did not answer that. He came and sat down on the step beside Harry, and the prosthetic leg took his weight with a different distribution than the real one, and the magical eye swiveled back to check the street before settling forward again. Ministry sensors logged a Class 7 event. That's a classification that exists almost entirely on paper. They invented it in 1932 for a category of supernatural manifestation they expected to encounter and never did. And now they have. Harry looked at the scorch on his knuckles. Did it hurt anyone? The Dursleys. Did it hurt anyone? Harry repeated. Moody considered him. No, good, Harry said. Not relief, it was not relief. It was the confirmation of a value he hadn't been sure would hold in the moment, and confirming it mattered, but the confirmation itself was quiet. Lupin had been standing in the doorway this whole time, performing a stillness that was clearly costing him something. He said, Harry, we need to take you somewhere safe. Dumbledore has arranged. Where does Dumbledore want to take me? A safe house called Grimmauld Place. It's in London. It's been used by the Order before. Is it Dumbledore's house? No, it belongs to. Is it Dumbledore's decision? Lupin stopped. The garden sprinkler down the road had come on at some point, going back and forth across a lawn in a repeated arc, the sound of it constant and unremarkable. I want to know who decided where I would live, Harry said, not who carried me here. Not who wrote the letters. I want to know who looked at the options and made the choice and said yes, that house, those people, that cupboard. Lupin's face was doing something that required visible effort to contain. I've been in that cupboard for 6 days, Harry said, this summer. I've been in this house for 11 years. Every summer I come back. Someone decided that. Someone decides that every year, and I want to know who. The sprinkler went left, right, left. Moody said, Dumbledore. Harry said, I know. He looked at the ash on the lawn. I just wanted someone to say it. Lupin said quietly, the careful voice of a person who is choosing every word. Harry, I want you to know that some of us didn't know the full extent of. Some of you, Harry said. Lupin stopped. Some of you didn't know the full extent, and Dumbledore knew what extent. Lupin's hands in the pockets of the patched coat had gone tightly closed. Harry could see the shape of the fists through the fabric. Did he tell you about my scar? Harry said. The thing in it. Lupin looked at Moody. Moody looked at Harry. No, did he tell any of you? He told us there was a residual. He said it required monitoring. He said. Lupin stopped himself. He started again. No, he told us very little about your scar. He knew what it was, Harry said. He didn't know this with certainty. He was extrapolating from structure, from the fact that Dumbledore had theories, and that Dumbledore's theories were not things he shared freely, and that the thing in his scar had been there for 11 years, and Dumbledore had 11 years of proximity and would not have left an anomaly unexamined. I'm fairly sure he knew. The word fairly was doing a great deal of work, and all three of them understood this. For tonight, Harry said, I'll go where you want to take me. I'm tired and I want to sleep in a bed. He stood up. He was not tall, he'd missed too many meals across too many summers for the height he should have had, and he came to Lupin's shoulder and Moody's ear, and it made no difference at all to the way the sentence landed. After tonight, nobody moves me somewhere without asking me first. That's not a request. Moody's magical eye looked at him for a long moment. Understood, Moody said. Lupin said understood 1 second later. Harry looked at them. He was looking at them the way the thing that now lived in him looked at things, not from anger, not from calculation, but with the complete and patient attention of something that has infinite time and no forgiveness to offer and is simply recording what it sees. All right, he said, let me get Hedwig's cage. He was reaching for the latch on the garden gate when he heard bare feet on pavement. He knew what bare feet on pavement sounded like. He had run in bare feet on pavement. The Dursleys had occasionally misplaced his trainers, with the focused helpfulness of people who don't want to be caught misplacing them deliberately, and the specific percussion of it was distinct from shoes and distinct from socks, and now he heard it coming up Privet Drive from the direction of the park, and he turned. He came out of the dark between street lights. Thin was the first word, and it was not the right word, but it was the first one. Thin in the manner of something structural, not the thinness of illness, but the thinness of a person from whom something load-bearing has been removed, and who is still standing through a combination of desperation and muscle memory. The clothes were rags, not metaphorical rags. Rags, the remnants of what might have been gray cotton in a previous decade, held to his body in strips. His hair was long and dark, and his face underneath the ruin of it had a bone structure that might, once, in different conditions, have been described as handsome. His eyes found Harry. They stopped. Moody had his wand out before the man cleared the second street light. Black, don't move. I'm not the man. Sirius Black stopped at the gate. He looked at Harry with the look of someone who has been told a thing is gone and has nevertheless been thinking about it every day and is now confronted with the evidence that it was not gone. His chest was moving with the exertion of running, and he gripped the gate post with one hand, and the knuckles went white. Harry. Harry looked at him. Sirius Black's face had the quality of someone who was trying to speak, but the sentences were blocking each other. I felt it, he finally said. The voice was wrecked, hoarse, and cracked at the edges from disuse or screaming or both. Whatever came here tonight, I felt it through the bond. Godfather to godson, there's a connection, I was in London. I'd been in London for a week. I felt it and I ran. He was looking at Harry's hands. At the scorch marks, pink in the street light. Are you? I'm all right, Harry said. Something in Sirius's face gave way in a specific, localized way, not collapse, one thing giving way. I should have been here, he said. When they took me, when I got arrested, I kept waiting for someone to explain, for someone to tell Dumbledore, for someone I kept thinking he would know. He knows everything, he always knows. He would find out I was innocent and he would, and you were a year old and there was no one. The sentence fell apart. He pressed his forehead to the gate post. I should have fought harder, at the trial. I had no trial, I should have demanded. You were grieving, Harry said. Sirius looked up. Your best friend was dead, Harry said. You thought another one had betrayed you. You just lost everything inside a week. And then they put you in Azkaban. He said it evenly, informational. You did not fight hard enough. You ran out of capacity. Sirius looked at him for a long moment. He seemed to be recalibrating something. You're 12, you shouldn't have to. I know, Harry said. I'm not making you feel better. I'm telling you the sequence of what happened. Sirius blinked. You were in prison, Harry said, and Dumbledore wasn't. He watched Sirius take this in. Watched the moment it arranged itself into something Sirius had not arranged before, two facts placed in proximity that revealed a third thing neither of them was. He watched Sirius work backwards from the third thing and find Privet Drive at the end of it, and the reports, and the 11 summers, and the cupboard. Harry, Sirius said, and it came out like something he'd been told he wasn't allowed to say. He knew where I was, Harry said. You knew where I was. The difference is your location. Sirius's grip on the gate post went tighter. He was staring at Harry now, with the expression of a man looking at something that is both what he hoped it would be and nothing like what he imagined, and the distance between those two things is something he's going to have to live in. What did they do to you? Sirius said. In that house. Harry looked at the garden. At the immaculate lawn, at the ash on it dispersed in the evening wind, gray against the green. You could ask Mrs. Figg, he said. She's been filing reports for years. Lupin made a sound in the back of his throat. Moody said nothing. He had put his wand away at some point, Harry hadn't tracked when, and was standing just behind Harry's left shoulder with the stillness of a man who is performing the hardest thing he knows how to do, which is witness something without intervening in it. Sirius looked at Lupin. Lupin looked at the ground, the specific ground just in front of his own feet with total concentration. Oh, Sirius said. It was not a surprised sound. It was the sound of a thing clicking into a configuration that makes a horrible kind of sense, and the click of it was audible. Oh, he. There's a list of things he didn't tell anyone, Harry said. It's getting longer. He opened the gate. Sirius stepped back to let him through, and as Harry passed he held his hand out, slowly, palm upward, the instinctive and slightly miscalculated gesture of a person who has been imagining this moment for years, and is now discovering that imagination had not prepared him for the specifics. A hand offered, an acknowledgement. Harry looked at it, he put his hand in it, not warmly. Sirius's grip tightened around his immediately, the grip of someone who has been drowning for 13 years and has found something solid, and Harry let this happen. He allowed the grip. He did not return it with equivalent pressure, but he allowed it. The scorch marks on his hand were warm in Sirius's palm. Sirius looked down at them. He looked at the pink lines across the knuckles, the heel, the webbing of the thumb. He was memorizing them, which Harry could see in the quality of the attention. Who's going to look after these? Sirius said, very quietly. Harry took his hand back, gently, without pulling. I am, he said. Come on. They took him to a townhouse in London that smelled of old wood and damp stone, and the particular sadness of a house maintained rather than inhabited. The street was tall and London gray, and the house sat between two others that had been converted to flats, asserting its single-family solidity like a matter of principle. A portrait in the entrance hall screamed the moment Harry crossed the threshold, not in surprise. In something more considered than surprise, the scream of someone who has seen something they recognize, and the recognition is not welcome. Harry looked at the portrait, an elderly woman in black robes, her face contorted, her mouth a rictus of offended horror. She was looking at him, not past him, not at something in the room behind him, at him. The scream cut off. She stared at him for 3 seconds. Then she pulled her own curtains shut from the inside. Harry went up the stairs. They gave him a room on the 3rd floor. It had a window and a bed and a chest of drawers and a rug that might once have been red. It was 3 times the size of the cupboard. The window looked out over the London street with its orange sodium sky, the perpetual glow of the city doing what cities do, pressing light up against the dark. He stood at the window for a while. He heard Sirius and Lupin in the kitchen 2 floors below, not the words, the rhythm of it, the low, urgent back and forth of people who have a great deal to say and are trying to find the order to say it in. He heard Moody leave through the front door and not come back. He heard the house settling around him, the creaks and pops of old timber, and a portrait somewhere muttering in a low continuous bass that was words and not words, a man talking to himself in an empty room. He looked at his hands in the window glass. His reflection held them out at the same time, palms up, and in the sodium light the scorch marks were faintly amber, still warm, still settling. He went to sleep. He slept on his side in the middle of the bed, not diagonal, and his body did not instinctively calculate the walls, because the walls were far enough away not to require calculation. He slept without dreaming. Hedwig settled on the windowsill, and the window's orange glow was a constant behind his eyelids, and his scar was nothing, flat, old. He woke once at some hour when the city had quieted to its minimum register. He lay still and listened to the house. Sirius was still awake. He could hear pacing on the floor below, slow and arrhythmic, a man whose body had not relearned rest. He closed his eyes. He thought about the thing that had come to the cupboard and the thing it had taken, and what the absence felt like, and how the absence felt specifically like space, not emptiness but space, room, the kind of room that exists before you put furniture in it, and is full of possibility precisely because it is full of nothing yet. He let himself think, this is mine. He let himself think just this, just to start. He fell asleep with his palm flat on the mattress, the heel of his scarred hand pressed against the clean linen, and he did not move until morning. In the kitchen, Sirius made tea, with the focused determination of a man for whom boiling a kettle is a form of control. He made it too strong and too hot, and stood at the counter holding his mug and not drinking it. Harry sat at the table. Outside, London made its morning sounds. A bus, someone's radio through an open window, the specific percussion of a city resuming itself. Dumbledore came before you woke up, Sirius said. I know. Sirius looked at him over the mug. He wanted to see you. What did you tell him? That you were sleeping and would see him when you chose to. Harry nodded. He didn't. Sirius stopped. He said things about the situation, about the entity the thing that came. He called it ancient. He had terms for it. He set the mug down. He said the thing in your scar is gone. He called it a Horcrux. The word landed on the kitchen table. Neither of them knew what to do with it yet. He'd known, Harry said. He said he'd known what it was. Sirius looked at his tea. He said he had suspicions. He said the evidence was he'd known, Harry said. The kitchen was very quiet. Sirius poured the tea down the sink and stood at the basin with his back to the room. His shoulders had a position that Harry had no language for yet, but filed without a category. The position of a person for whom this is one new piece of evidence in a case they've been building against their own judgment for 30 years. He's going to want to manage this, Sirius said. Whatever you've become. Whatever this, the writer, I've been trying to find references. In the library here last night, there are references in a couple of the darker volumes. He's going to want to study it, contain it, make it useful. I know, Harry said. He does it with good intentions. Sirius said this with the particular care of someone choosing between accuracy and loyalty, and choosing accuracy. That's the thing about him. The intentions are genuinely good. I know that too, Harry said. He ate the eggs Sirius made. They were slightly burnt, and neither of them mentioned it. The kitchen settled around them, old and full and complicated. Tell him I'll see him at Hogwarts, Harry said when he was done. In September, on my schedule. He went upstairs. Sirius stood at the kitchen table looking at the plate in the sink, and the small circular burn on the wood where Harry's mug had been, not from heat, not from anything ordinary, and the mark was already cool when he put his finger to it, already integrating itself into the surface, already permanent. The house held its breath around him, and outside London moved at its own pace, indifferent and ongoing, full of people who did not know what had been in a 12-year-old boy's skull since he was a year old, or what had come to take it, or what had decided, ancient, cold, absolutely precise in its accounting, that it was owed. The mark on the table was the color of a healed scar. Sirius looked at it for a long time. Chapter 2, The Great Hall at Dawn. September arrived the way it always did in magical Britain, a precise recalibration of the light, the angle of it changing overnight from summer's horizontal blaze to something that came down from a higher position and meant business. The trees on the approach to Hogsmeade had already turned at their tips. The castle, from a distance, looked exactly like itself. Harry and Sirius walked through the gates of Hogwarts at 3:14 in the morning. The train had been Harry's idea to refuse. He'd spent 3 weeks in Grimmauld Place calculating, in the way he calculated things now methodically, without drama, consulting the thing that lived in him the way you consult a compass, what happened when the writer surfaced in enclosed spaces. He knew about the cupboard door, he knew about the scorch mark on the kitchen table. He knew that twice in August he had woken at 3 in the morning, with his hands warm and the smell of burning iron in his nostrils, and Hedwig watching him from the windowsill with the focused attention of a creature who had made a decision about which side she was on. A train compartment full of children was not a controlled environment, so they walked. Sirius had acquired a wand. Harry hadn't asked how. Sirius had offered to explain, and Harry had said it was fine. He didn't need to know, and wore a coat that was not new but was not rags, a dark wool thing someone had left in Grimmauld Place's depths, and he walked beside Harry with the specific quality of a man who has been given a task he considers sacred and is trying not to treat it like one, because treating it like one would make him awkward, and awkward would be wrong. They didn't talk much on the walk up from the gates. The night was clear and cold in the way September nights are cold, a cold that has not yet committed to anything serious, but is putting its intentions on the table. The castle rose out of the dark ahead of them, and out of its own reflection in the lake, and Harry looked at it without ceremony. The gates had opened before they reached them. Sirius noticed this, the gates swinging inward on their own, no charm, no spoken word, the ironwork simply deciding to yield. He looked at Harry. Harry had not broken stride. "You've been here before," Sirius said, which was not quite what he meant. "The castle knows I'm coming," Harry said, which was not quite an explanation. The path up was empty. The grounds were empty. Every window was dark except one, the tower where Dumbledore's office sat, a warm amber light behind the glass, the lamp of a man who does not sleep on nights when he is waiting for something. Harry looked at that window once, then he stopped looking. McGonagall held the side door. She was in tartan, her hair in its night plait rather than the daytime configuration, and she held herself with the posture of a woman who has had occasion to be awake at difficult hours and has maintained her standards throughout. She looked at Harry with an assessment that lasted 3 seconds and took in everything visible. "Mr. Potter," then a beat, adjusting. "Sirius." Sirius opened his mouth. "Later," she said, "there's tea upstairs." She took them up through the castle's back passages, the servants' routes that bypassed the grand staircases and the moving steps and most of the portraits. Some portraits were visible through archways as they passed, a sleeping Tudor-era woman, a still life that wasn't quite still, and 2 of them woke as Harry went by. Both went immediately back to feign sleep with the unconvincing haste of people who have decided not to be involved. She showed them to the Gryffindor common room and then stood at the portrait hole with her hands folded and said, "The headmaster." "When I'm ready," Harry said. She looked at him. She was a woman who had administered this school for 30 years on the reliable fuel of clarity, clear rules, clear consequences, clear hierarchies, the clean architecture of a place where expectations were stated and met. Harry's flat calm was not unclear. That was the problem. It was perfectly clear. She simply could not find the lever that ordinarily operated in situations like this. "Very well," she said. "Breakfast is at 7. She left. Her footsteps went down the stairs without hurrying. Harry went through the portrait hole into the common room. The fire was banked to embers. The chairs sat at the angles of the last people to use them, still carrying the geometric memory of bodies. Bookshelves. The notice board with its end-of-term notices that no one had taken down. The smell of old stone and wood, and the specific institutional warmth of a room that holds several hundred people for 9 months a year and keeps that warmth in its walls through the summer. He sat on the hearthrug because the chairs felt like a decision, and he didn't want to make a decision yet. He looked at the embers. Sirius came in and sat in the nearest chair and leaned his elbows on his knees and looked at the fire and said nothing. This was one of the things about Sirius that Harry was, cautiously, beginning to find workable. He had a capacity for silence. Azkaban had done terrible things to him, and one incidental thing that was not terrible. It had burned out the part of him that felt compelled to fill silence with speech. He could sit in a room and simply be in the room. It was an unlikely gift, and Harry was willing to take it. The sky outside the high windows went from black to the particular deep blue that precedes gray. "I'll stay near the village," Sirius said eventually. "There are places I'll be close." "Okay, you can if something happens." "You can find me, I know." Sirius looked at the fire. "He'll push for a meeting early, before the students. He'll want to. I know what he wants. Establish the parameters, before anyone else can." "I know," Harry said. Sirius ran a hand through his hair. It was clean now, and the gray in it showed in the firelight, iron gray at the temples, threading through the black. He looked like a man who was 40 and had been weathered into something older. "I'm not trying to manage you. I'm telling you what I read in his letters. I know you're not." "Right." Sirius looked at him. The fire between them made his shadow large against the wall. "You're going to be all right in here." Harry looked at the embers. They were orange at their cores and gray at their edges, the ones that were going cold. "I'm always all right," he said. Sirius looked at the fire for another moment. Then he said, "That's actually what worries me," and said nothing else. Sky went gray and then pale gold, and Harry went up to the dormitory and slept for 4 hours in a bed that still held the faint impression of someone else's term. The students arrived by train at 6 in the evening, and the sorting happened at 7, and Harry came into the Great Hall and the candles went down 2 degrees. Crossed the full length of the hall in the span of 2 seconds, and then they came back up, and nobody said anything about it because to say something about it would have required acknowledging it, and the Great Hall at the start of term sorting was not a context anyone was prepared to use for acknowledging things. Harry sat at the Gryffindor table between Neville Longbottom and a gap. He poured water from the jug. He watched the first years file in. They were the standard issue of frightened 11-year-olds. New robes, wide eyes, the particular social arithmetic of 30 children who don't know each other yet sorting themselves by instinct into clusters. 2 boys near the back who were already friends and were managing their fear through each other. A girl near the front who had decided to manage hers through a performance of not having any. 3 who had gone rigid and formal, as if good posture might help. He had been one of them. A year ahead of him, actually. He'd been 11, not 12. A year ago, he'd stood in that line not knowing what was about to be asked of him, understanding only that there was a right answer and that he didn't know what it was. He looked at them with something that did not have a good name and did not need one. The hat sorted. Harry tracked the names and sound without matching them to faces, cataloging instead the staff table. McGonagall, attentive. Flitwick, genuinely pleased, the way he was every year, a man who found the thing enjoyable regardless of repetition. Hagrid at the end, enormous and self-contained, holding the particular stillness of a man who knows he takes up too much space and has decided the considerate thing is to take up as little of it as possible, which Harry had always found precisely devastating in a way he had never examined. Dumbledore at the center, he was looking at Harry, not the general survey of a headmaster checking on his hall, specific attention. Harry met it. Neither of them looked away first. The moment simply concluded when Dumbledore turned to applaud a sorting, and the line was broken. At the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy had been mid-performance. Harry caught it peripherally, the gesture, the audience of Crabbe and Goyle, the sentence in its second half. And then Malfoy's eyes found Harry across the hall and the sentence stopped. Not trailed off, stopped. Full stop at a syllable that was not a full stop. Malfoy looked at the candle in front of him with the focused, scientific attention of someone reading it for information. He did not look across the hall again for the rest of the feast. Hermione, arriving at the table 10 minutes into the meal with a second year she'd helped navigate the portrait hole sequence, sat across from Harry and put her pumpkin juice down and said, without preamble, "What happened this summer?" "Things," Harry said. She looked at his hands, at the scorch marks, which he'd stopped trying to hide because hiding them required energy he preferred to spend on other things. She looked at them for a precise 3 seconds, in the manner of someone filing an observation for future reference. "All right," she said. Ron arrived, slid in beside Harry, reached across him for the bread basket and said, "You look different, do I?" "Yeah." Ron put 3 rolls on his plate, "like you decided something." Harry considered this. "Something decided," he said, "more or less." Ron nodded as if this made sense, which, Harry was learning, was one of Ron's more underrated qualities. He ate his roll and said nothing else about it. Potions was Thursday. Harry sat in the front row and placed his books on the desk with the precision of someone who has chosen this location specifically and has no intention of being elsewhere. The other students arranged themselves around him with the instinctive geometry of a group that has registered something without being able to name it. Neville sat 2 desks to his right, Hermione one behind him. Ron, who had taken one look at Harry's chosen desk and decided proximity was not his priority today, sat 4 rows back with the strategic wisdom of a boy who has siblings. Snape entered the way he always entered, the robes, the measured cadence, the air of a man who has constructed his authority from better materials than most and is aware of this. He moved to the front of the dungeon and turned, and his gaze moved across the class in its habitual survey, pricing each student against some internal standard that none of them met, and when it reached Harry, it passed over him without inflection. The inflection was elsewhere, being held elsewhere carefully. He began, "There will be no foolish wand-waving in this class, precise and level. Many of you will find that your previous assumptions about the nature of magic are of limited use here. Potions rewards patience, attention, and precision, qualities that are a pause, a consideration not evenly distributed." He picked up Harry's file from the desk. Harry had not known there was a file. He updated his understanding of the situation. Snape read from it. He did this with the performance of thoroughness, as if the file's contents were genuinely new to him, as if he had not spent a year in close proximity to Harry and compiled his own data. He read about James Potter, the arrogance, the unearned popularity, the mediocrity disguised as ease. He read each entry with the care of someone who has rehearsed the reading and knows exactly which words will land where. Then he read about Lily Evans Potter. He did this with a different quality, not cruelty, something more complicated than cruelty. He read with the precision of a man handling something that belongs to him in a way he cannot legally establish. Harry watched the clock above the door. The second hand moved. He counted. At 46 seconds. "You're angry because she chose someone better than you." Into the middle of the room, not at Snape. A flat, informational sentence. The sentence of someone reporting a fact they've confirmed through observation. "You should probably stop taking that out on her, son." The dungeon was a specific kind of quiet. Not the quiet of people not speaking, the quiet of people who have stopped breathing and are waiting to find out if that was a permanent condition. Snape's face did not move. His hands on the file went still. The rest of him went still. He was a man whose primary instrument was control, not coldness, not cruelty. Those were the surface. Underneath was an absolute and total investment in the management of how he was perceived at all times, and he was controlling, right now, with the extreme effort of someone holding something closed that is pushing from the inside. Harry held his gaze, 7 seconds, not the writer. He had learned the writer's modes in 3 weeks of careful and involuntary observation, and this was not one of them. This was his own eyes, his own face, 12 years old, looking at Severus Snape without hatred, without contempt, without any of the emotional textures that Snape's management strategies were built to deflect, just looking. Snape, Harry had come to understand, had developed his entire armature to manage a specific quality of attention, the kind that judged, accused, blamed, or dismissed. He had no management strategy for attention that simply saw. He assigned detention. He set it precisely, evenly. 50 points from Gryffindor. Detention Friday evening. "Yes, sir," the class proceeded. Snape taught it. He taught it well. The man was genuinely extraordinary at what he did, and Harry, who was now applying the writer's methodological patience to everything he observed, could see the quality of it under the performance. The precision, the genuine knowledge, it was there. It was buried, but it was there. At the end, the other students filed out. Harry packed his bag. He heard behind him the precise sound of a chair on stone floor, not dragged, placed. The weight of a person sitting down. He did not turn around. He went out into the corridor. He did not check behind him. Later, Seamus Finnegan, going back for a forgotten bag 20 minutes after class, would find Snape at the front of the room in a student chair, not grading, not reading, not performing any task at all, sitting with his hands flat on his knees and staring at the middle distance with the expression of a man who has received a diagnosis and is deciding what to do about it. Seamus would retrieve his bag very quietly and leave very quickly, and would not be entirely able to explain the urgency. He would tell Neville. Neville would tell Harry, 3 days later, in the hushed and slightly apologetic manner of someone relaying information they're not sure they should have. Harry would say, "Thank you for telling me." Neville would find that he couldn't read the response, which was, he would decide, probably fine. The letter arrived at dinner on the 3rd day, Dumbledore's hand on the envelope, the peace seal in green wax. Harry turned it over twice, running his thumb along the seal's edge without breaking it, and then held it for a moment. He broke the seal and read, "Harry, when you are ready, I would be grateful for the opportunity to speak with you. My office door will be unlocked. I have left the password as lemon drop. Should you wish to change it, please do. It is your meeting. I ask only that we speak before the week is out." He read it twice. The tone was different, not by much. Dumbledore's tonal range was narrow and expertly managed, but enough. The word "you're in your meeting," the offer of the password as a concession, the absence of "I have arranged" or "I would like to discuss" or any of the other constructions that presented themselves as invitations while operating as instructions. "He stopped summoning," Hermione said, from across the table, her book open but not being read. "He's trying a different instrument," Harry said. She looked at him over the book. "Are you going to go tomorrow morning, early, before breakfast?" Ron, beside him, was watching this exchange with the particular attention he brought to situations where something was happening that he understood better by proximity than by analysis. He said, "You want me to come?" "No," Harry said. Ron nodded. He ate his pie. "All right." Hermione looked at the letter, and then at Harry's hands, and then back at her book. She turned a page she had not finished reading. Harry watched her do this and said nothing about it. Fawkes was cycling. Harry could see it before anything else when he came through the office door, the phoenix on his perch with his plumage thinned to translucency, the approaching burning visible in the way. Very old things become visible when they're about to go, through themselves rather than from the outside. The portraits were all awake, every former headmaster, every headmistress in their gilded frames, holding the specific stillness of witnesses who have arranged themselves before a thing begins. Phineas Nigellus Black in his frame had 2 high spots of color in his gray cheeks and was looking at a point 6 inches to the left of Harry. Dumbledore was at his desk. He stood when Harry came in. He always stood for everyone, students included, a gesture of respect so consistent it had ceased to communicate respect specifically and had become instead just a thing he did. But tonight the standing had a different weight. He stood and he said, "Harry, thank you for coming," and the thank you was not reflexive. Harry sat down. He sat down without being invited to, pulling the chair back from in front of the desk and sitting in it with the directness of someone who has decided that the geography of rooms is not a performance he's going to give. Dumbledore sat back down. The desk between them was the usual controlled landscape, the pensive covered under its cloth, the silver instruments ticking in their rows, the bowl of sweets at the corner, lemon drops, sherbet lemons, the gentle whimsy of a man who understands the social function of small offerings. Harry looked at the bowl, he looked at the instruments, he looked at the pensive cloth. "You look well," Dumbledore said. "I look like myself," Harry said. Dumbledore's hands came to rest on the desk, folded, a composed gesture that was also the gesture of a man who needs something to do with his hands and has chosen stillness. He was wearing deep blue with silver stitching, and the half-moon spectacles and the beard and all of it, all the carefully assembled architecture of wisdom and warmth and benevolent power, and Harry looked at it the way he had learned to look at things. He thought of the 11-year-old who had sat in this chair, and wanted this man's approval with the specific desperation of a child who has never been approved of. He sat with that thought for a moment. He set it down. "I imagine you have questions," Dumbledore said. "One," Harry said. Dumbledore waited. He was a man who had patience as a tool, real patience, cultivated over a century, the patience of someone who has learned that most people will fill silence if you give it to them. He offered it now, the silence, the space. Harry didn't fill it. He let it sit between them and breathe. Then he said, "You knew what they were." Dumbledore's mouth opened to begin a sentence. "You knew what they were," Harry said again, not louder, lower. The temperature in the sentence dropping by a degree, which was how the writer entered things, not with fire, not first, but with cold, the cold first. The cold that is the absence of any possibility that what you are about to say is going to change anything. "I had," Dumbledore began. "You knew what they were." The third time it was not a repetition. It was a close. Dumbledore was quiet. 11 years of Mrs. Figg's reports, Harry said. "She's meticulous. She uses forms. She described the cupboard in her 4th report. I know this because she told me she did, last summer, and she described it as though she thought describing it was enough, as though describing it meant someone would do something about it." He paused. "Someone read the descriptions, someone filed them, someone decided the descriptions were acceptable." Dumbledore's hands on the desk were perfectly still. "Harry, what I did with full knowledge that it was inadequate. That's not the same as saying you knew what they were. In full acceptance that I would have to answer for it in time. You knew what they were," Harry said, 4 times, a door closing. Dumbledore took his glasses off. He pinched the bridge of his nose. It was a gesture Harry had never seen from him before, not performed weariness, but the involuntary physical response of a man experiencing something that is located in his skull. He put the glasses back. "Yes," he said. "I knew the quality of their, I knew that the environment was not, yes, I knew." The fire in the grate. Fawkes shifted on his perch, one eye half opening, the thin plumage catching the light for a moment, translucent gold. "And the Horcrux," Harry said. The word landed differently on Dumbledore than it had landed on Sirius. Sirius had encountered it as new information. Dumbledore received it as a term he'd hoped not to hear from this direction. "You knew what was in my scar," Harry said. "I had developed a theory. How long?" "Harry, the evidence was not conclusive until, how long did you have the theory?" The silver instruments ticked. Outside the tower window, the grounds were dark and the lake was dark, and the beech tree was a shape against the sky. "Since you were 4, Dumbledore said. The sentence did not move Harry. He had expected a number in that range. The number confirmed a geometry he had already mapped. He sat with it and checked his mapping against it and found they agreed. "You put me back every summer," Harry said. With what you knew in my scar and what you knew in that house, you put me back every summer." "The blood protection was real," Dumbledore said, and his voice had recovered its measured quality, the quality of a man returning to prepared ground. "Your mother's sacrifice created a ward that required renewal through proximity to her blood. The magic was genuine. Children have died, Harry, because I underestimated threats of this nature, and I refused to. You knew what they were," Harry said. The fifth time the sentence had no temperature at all. It was past cold. It was the sentence on the other side of cold, where things are simply facts, inert and permanent, requiring nothing from anyone. Dumbledore stopped. He sat across the desk from Harry, and he was very still. "I placed you there because the protection required it," he said quietly. "I left you there because removing you would have compromised the ward, and I calculated." He stopped himself. He began again. "I made a calculation about your safety versus the conditions of your life. I made it as though it were mine to make." "Yes," Harry said, "it was not mine to make. No." Dumbledore looked at his hands. He looked at them the way Sirius had looked at his own hands in the kitchen at Grimmauld Place, cataloging them as instruments of a life that had been run with good intentions and poor accounting. "I would like to explain," Dumbledore said, "the fuller picture. That there are things about the prophecy, about the nature of the fight against Voldemort that bear on the decisions I made, and I believe if you understood them." "I'll hear them later," Harry said. "When I choose to." Dumbledore looked at him. "Of course." "Right now I want to show you something," Harry said. He did not ask permission. The writer did not surface. There was no fire, no transformation, no visible evidence that anything had changed. Harry looked at Dumbledore across the desk, and the thing that lived in him turned its attention the way a lens turns. No moving parts, just refocus, the sudden bringing near of something that had been at a tolerable distance. He found one moment. He did not choose it consciously. The writer's accounting did not work through his conscious choices. He found the moment the way water finds the lowest point, the path of most truth, most cost, most undeniable evidence of what it was trying to establish. Harry was 7 years old, Christmas morning on Privet Drive. The tree was artificial and had colored lights, and there were presents underneath it. Genuinely, a pile of them, 15 or 20, because Vernon believed that visible abundance in the domestic space was a matter of social pride. The presents were wrapped in paper with Santas on it, and Petunia had curled the ribbons on them with scissors. They were real presents. They were for Dudley. Harry was in the cupboard. The door was open a crack because someone had been careless with the latch. He could see the tree from where he sat, the width of the crack giving him a strip of the living room. The tree, the presents, the edge of the sofa, the television with the Christmas special on. He could hear the paper being torn. He could hear Dudley making the sounds Dudley made when a present exceeded expectations. He was 7. He had understood for 2 years already that his name would not be on the presents. He had done the arithmetic, tested the pattern, confirmed the hypothesis. There was no surprise in it. What he was doing in the cupboard was trying to decide whether to feel something about it or whether to take the thing he felt and put it somewhere it would not take up space, because the space was finite and the thing was large and the space was all he had. He was 7. He was deciding not to need anything. He could not have described it that way at 7. He had the capacity to describe it that way now, 12 years old in Dumbledore's office, and the writer carried the moment across the desk with the precision and dispassion of a court submitting evidence. Dumbledore saw it. Harry knew the moment it landed, because Dumbledore's face performed an event that Harry had not known it was capable of. Not the surface was controlled. It was always controlled, a century of practice, but underneath the surface, in the structure of it. Something shifted in the structure of his face. Something that had been arguing went silent. He sat in his chair. He did not speak. Harry watched the clock on the wall. The second hand moved. He counted. Dumbledore sat in his chair and was silent for 43 seconds. When he spoke, his voice had changed in the specific way that voices change when the instrument is still working, but the person operating it is working from a different place. I have treated you as a variable," he said, "in an equation that I told myself was essential. I told myself that the product of the equation, the defeat of Voldemort, the protection of the wizarding world, justified the methodology." A pause. "Children are not variables." "No," Harry said. "I knew this. I have always known this." "Yes." "Knowing it did not prevent me from." "I know," Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. He looked at him the way a man looks at something when he has run out of the language that usually stands between him and what he's looking at, and there is only the looking. Harry stood up. "If you make a decision about my life without asking me," Harry said, "I will make sure every portrait in this room knows exactly what I just showed you, and portraits talk. Phineas Nigellus talks to anyone who will listen. He glanced at Phineas Nigelus's frame. The former headmaster was now looking at a point approximately 12 inches above his own painted head. "I'll hear about the prophecy when I'm ready. I'll hear everything else when I'm ready. Until I say I'm ready, you will ask me." He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. "I don't hate you," he said. It was true, and it was also not a comfort, and both of those things were intentional. "That's all." He went out. The door closed without sound. Snape was on the landing. He had parchments under his arm and the expression of a man who had been moving from one place to another with a specific purpose and had arrived at an obstacle that had not been on his map. He looked at Harry. Harry looked at him. The staircase was narrow. Neither of them stepped back. "Potter," Snape said. "Professor, the headmaster, I just left." Snape's gaze moved to the door at the top of the stairs and then back to Harry. He was recalibrating. Harry could see it in the quality of his stillness, not the stillness of control, but the stillness of computation. "He asked me to speak with you regarding the entity. He sent you first because he thinks you're the most prepared," Harry said. "He's wrong, but not in the way he usually is. He thinks you're prepared because you've dealt with dark magic professionally. That's not the preparation this requires." Snape's chin rose by a fraction. It was his tell for being caught off guard and choosing not to show it. "And what preparation does it require?" "An honest account of your own ledger," Harry said, "which you've been avoiding for about 15 years. The parchments creaked under Snape's grip. He adjusted his hold. "I have spent 15 years atoning," Harry said. "That's not the same thing. Atoning outsources the cost. You've been spending the debt on someone who didn't rack it up." He said it without heat, without accusation. Informational. "You should ask yourself what you've actually been doing and who it's been for." Snape's face performed none of the things it usually performed. It went through one change and stopped. The look of a man who has been handed back a sentence he wrote himself and is being asked to read it with better light. "You want to ask me if it hurts," Harry said. "When it comes, that's the question underneath everything else." Snape said, "Does it?" "Yes." "The manifestation?" "Yes." Snape was quiet. He looked at Harry's hands, at the scorch marks the way everyone looked at the scorch marks now, as if they were a text that could be read with sufficient patience. "There is literature," he said, "regarding entities of this classification. Certain binding conditions, requirements of the host. Send me whatever you find," Harry said. "In writing, I'll read it." Snape looked at him. He was searching for something in Harry's face, the thing he had been searching for all year last year and failing to categorize. The arrogance, the inherited ease, the father's profile. He had built an entire system of response on those foundations, and now the foundations were doing something he had not engineered them to do. "Go see him," Harry said. He tilted his head toward the office door. "He needs someone who knows the whole picture. That's you." He went down the stairs. Snape stood on the landing and did not move. He was still there when Harry reached the corridor below. He was still there for a long time after that, the parchments under his arm, standing in the exact spot where he'd been stopped, which was also the exact spot where he'd been standing for 15 years, the evening feast. The hall was full and loud with the particular energy of people returned to a familiar place and reasserting their belonging in it. Harry ate roast chicken. He listened to Ron describe a Chudley Cannons match with the committed enthusiasm of a person for whom sports loyalty is a religion, and the religion has let him down repeatedly, but he's not leaving the church. He watched the staff table. Dumbledore came in late. He always came in late, the theatrical timing of it. The entrance that confirmed the show was running because he had decided, but tonight his walk was different in a way that would not register to most people and did register to Harry. The weight of it was distributed differently across his shoulders. He sat down. He looked at his hands. He picked up his fork and put it back down. He stood up. The hall noticed in stages, one table at a time, conversations stalling, the silence propagating from the staff table outward the way silence propagates when something is happening that everyone instinctively understands requires witness. By the time Dumbledore had crossed half the hall, the Great Hall of Hogwarts was completely quiet for the first time that evening. He walked to the Gryffindor table. He walked along its length. He stopped behind Harry Potter, who had not looked up from his plate. Albus Dumbledore went to one knee on the flagstone floor. He did not go to the center of the room. He did not stand where everyone could see him best. He went to his knee in the narrow space behind Harry's chair, between Harry and the next bench, in the specific and unremarkable location where Harry happened to be sitting. The stone was cold and the great hall was silent, and he stayed on his knee and said, quietly, "I was wrong to place you with the Dursleys without your knowledge or consent. I was wrong not to remove you when I received reports describing how you were treated. I made those decisions as if the right to make them belonged to me." He paused. Pause was not for effect. It did not. "I ask your forgiveness. I have no right to expect it." The silence held. At the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy was looking at the space between his hands on the tablecloth. At the Hufflepuff table, 3 sixth-years were not moving. Neville, to Harry's right, had gone very still in the way that Neville went still when too many things were happening at once, and he was trying to receive all of them without losing any. Hermione's book was closed. Ron had put his fork down. Harry looked at his plate. The chicken had cooled during the walk across the hall. He ate a piece of it. He chewed. He put his fork down for a moment and looked at the candles above, and then he looked at his plate again. He picked up his fork. "I know," he said, 2 words. The flattest possible container for what they were being asked to hold. Not acceptance, not rejection. The acknowledgement of a person who has received the thing accurately and is not yet required to do anything with it. Dumbledore remained on his knee for 3 seconds exactly. Then he stood. He walked back across the hall. He sat down at the staff table and poured himself water from the jug in front of him and drank it, and when he put the glass down, his hand was entirely steady. At the far end of the staff table, Snape picked up his fork. He ate a piece of potato. He did not look up. He ate with the focused attention of a man who has decided that continuing is the only statement worth making. The hall returned to itself in increments, not to what it had been before, to a version of itself that contained what it had just seen and was working out what to do with the weight of it. Conversations resumed carefully, and the careful quality of them would fade by next week, but for tonight it was there. Ron picked up his fork. "Harry," he said. "I know," Harry said. Ron looked at him, deciding, "You all right? I'm fine." Ron looked at him for another moment, the particular look of someone who suspects this is not true and has decided that pressing is not useful and not pressing is not abandonment. Then he said, "The chicken's good tonight," and ate it, and that was that. The ministry arrived the next morning. Harry was on the front steps of the castle with a book when the delegation came through the gates. 3 figures in ministry robes, 2 of whom were Aurors he didn't recognize, and 1 of whom was wearing pink. The pink was not incidental. The cardigan, the robes, the bow and the hair, the shoes, all pink, in varying registers, from the pale blush of the cardigan to the deeper rose of the outer robe. It was a color that communicated harmlessness with the specific insistence of a communication that knows it has to work hard. She walked with the steps of a woman who has been through difficult rooms and prevailed in them, who has never encountered a room she could not manage. She came up the path and stopped at the base of the steps and looked up at Harry with a smile that had been constructed in advance of its deployment, a smile prepared in the knowledge that it would be needed and placed on her face at the appropriate moment. Harry Potter, warm, professionally warm. "I'm so pleased to meet you at last. I'm Dolores Umbridge, Senior Undersecretary to the Minister for Magic. I've been asked to conduct a preliminary." Harry looked up from his book. He looked at Dolores Umbridge. The rider did not manifest. There was no fire, no skull, no chain. He was sitting on a cold stone step in September morning light with a book in his lap, and he was 12 years old. He looked at her, and the thing that lived in him looked through him with the specific attention it brought to every face it was directed toward. The full inventory, the complete accounting, the patient and total examination of every dark room a person has told themselves is not a dark room. Dolores Umbridge had many dark rooms. The smile stayed on her face for 5 seconds. 4 seconds was the limit of a smile controlled by the will. 5 seconds was the point at which the face begins to argue with the will. 6 seconds was the point at which the argument resolved in the face's favor. Her mouth closed. She stood at the base of the steps. She looked at Harry, and her eyes moved across his face in the frantic, rapid sweep of someone searching for the right surface to look at, the surface that doesn't look back and finding nothing. He watched her make the calculation. He could see it happening, the arithmetic of it moving behind her face, what the report would cost, what not filing it would cost, whether there was a version of this that served her interests, whether her interests could survive whatever she was looking at in this boy's eyes. The calculation took 11 seconds. "I believe," she said, "there may have been a miscommunication regarding the scheduling of this. I'll need to review the yes." She turned around. She walked back down the path. Her steps were the same length as before. She was a woman who maintained her walk under pressure, who understood that the walk was a message, but the pace was different. The pace was the pace of someone who has revised their understanding of a room and is leaving with efficiency. The 2 Aurors looked at each other. One of them looked at Harry. Harry had returned to his book. The Auror looked at the retreating pink figure, looked back at Harry. He said something to the other Auror in a tone too low to carry, and they conferred briefly and efficiently. Then they followed Umbridge out through the gates. The path was empty. Harry turned a page. The ministry report would be filed, he'd learn later, as inconclusive further review pending. The further review would be scheduled twice and canceled twice, and then removed from the calendar altogether, with a note that described the case as administratively complex and recommended ongoing monitoring at a distance. The person who filed this recommendation was not Umbridge. Umbridge's name would not appear on any ministry document related to Harry Potter for a considerable time. Sirius was at the gates. He'd been on the outside of the ward since morning, against the wall, in the coat that was not quite adequate for September in Scotland, but was what there was. He'd watched Umbridge arrive. He'd watched her leave at a pace that was not quite a run and was performing very hard at not being one. When Harry came back down the path, he was leaning against the gate post with his arms crossed, and he said, "What happened?" "Nothing," Harry said. She decided it wasn't worth it. Sirius looked at the road where Umbridge had gone. He looked back at Harry. He went through several expressions that were not quite questions. She came with orders. Yes. And she decided it wasn't worth it. Yes. Sirius uncrossed his arms. He ran a hand through his hair. He was doing the thing he did when he was trying to find the right sentence for something. The small, restless physical adjustments of a man whose body has more to say than his mouth has been given permission to say yet. "I've found a place," he said, "in Hogsmeade, above the post office. The woman who runs it she's not order, but she knows she's aware of certain things. She'll let me use the rooms. Okay, it's close, 10 minutes on foot from the gates. I know where the post office is." "Right," Sirius looked at him. "I'll be there." "I know you will." Sirius looked at the castle. At the towers, the ramparts, the flags doing what flags did in September wind. He looked at it the way a man looks at something that is keeping the thing he loves safe, and he is grateful to it, and also would prefer to be the one doing the keeping. He said, "I'm sorry I wasn't there sooner." He'd said this before, 3 times. Each time it had lived in a different place when it came out. The first time it had been a wound. The second it had been a plea. This time it came out like something being set down on a surface and released. "I know," Harry said. He said it the same way he'd said "I know" to Dumbledore in the Great Hall. Exact same configuration. Not forgiveness, not dismissal, not the prelude to something kinder or crueler. Just the acknowledgement of a fact received accurately. Sirius looked at him. He looked at him for a long moment with the gray eyes that Azkaban had made feverish and that the weeks since had been slowly, imperfectly, bringing back to something steadier. He looked at Harry the way Harry was still learning to be looked at, not with a history imposed over him, not with a role he was being fitted for, but with the actual shape of him in the actual moment. "Okay," Sirius said. Harry opened the gate. He went through it and back up the path toward the castle, and Sirius watched him go. Watched the scorch marks on his hands catch the thin September light, pink against his skin, the signature of something that had passed through and left its evidence. Permanent, already integrated, already his. Harry came back through the castle's main doors, and the entrance hall opened around him, stone and space, and the quiet of a morning between events. He went up the marble staircase, not hurrying. Portrait of a 17th century wizard on the second floor, landing, turned to watch him pass, and said nothing, and turned back. He stopped at the window that looked out over the grounds. The lake was flat in the morning light. The beech tree on the bank was beginning to turn at its upper branches, gold at the tips, still green in the body. A giant squid tentacle broke the lake's surface 30 yards out and curved back under in a slow arc, a movement that was purely its own business. Hagrid was crossing the grounds toward the pumpkin patch, his shadow going before him, enormous and soft-edged in the low light. He reached the pumpkins and crouched among them, which was an impressive feat of architecture, and found something, a pumpkin of specific quality, held up to examine it in both hands, a man confirming that something he grew is as good as he hoped. He held it up and the light came through it slightly, the orange of it, and he nodded once with the satisfaction of someone whose investment has paid out. He didn't know he was being watched. He put the pumpkin back with care and moved to the next row. Harry watched him. The writer was quiet, not gone. It was never gone. The scorch marks were its signature, and the signature was permanent, and at 3 a.m. sometimes the smell of burning road tar came through the dark of the dormitory, and Hedwig tracked him with her eyes from the windowsill until the warmth in his hands faded. It was never gone, but it was quiet. Quiet in the way that very large things are quiet when they are not at that moment required. The way the ocean is quiet between waves, not still, not absent, not anything so simple as either. Present, patient. Carrying everything it carries. He pressed his palm to the cold glass of the window. He thought about the list. The list he'd mentioned to Sirius on the night at Privet Drive. There's a list. It was accurate. It was still accurate. Wormtail, Voldemort, the Dursleys, Dumbledore, who had moved to a different category but had not left the list. The Ministry, the pureblood families who built their comfort on a structure they knew was weight-bearing and never asked what it was bearing the weight of. The list was real and the list was not going anywhere. He could hold the list and still look at Hagrid holding a pumpkin up to the September light. He could hold the list and still feel the cold glass under his palm and the weight of his own hand pressing back. These things were not in conflict. He was learning this, not because anyone had told him, not because the writer had a philosophy to offer. It didn't. It had an accounting system and a long memory and absolutely no interest in resolution. But because he was 12 and he was here and his scar was flat and old and the castle was around him, and the lake outside was doing what the lake did. He didn't forgive anyone. He had no plans to. He took his palm off the glass and looked at the mark his heat had left on it, the brief, already fading impression of a hand, outlined in condensation, 5 fingers and a palm, dissipating as he watched. He looked at it until it was gone, then he turned around and went to breakfast.